Hi, I'm Christian.
And I'm Angela, and we are married
and bored.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Married and Bored podcast. We are super excited because this is a special episode for us. Christian and I got the opportunity to sit down and talk with Nathan Lige, who is a game designer and producer over at Open Owl Studios based in Canada. You might have heard of Stars of Icarios or their reprint and new content coming out for Mythwind, soon to Kickstarter. This was a fun conversation filled with so many nuggets of wisdom, but also laughter. And not only do we talk Mythwind, but we also just talk games in general and game design. So whether you know about Open Owl Studios and their games, including their new reprint of Mythwind, or if you've never heard of them before and you want to hear more, we would invite you to keep on listening. Right after this break, we'll be here with Nathan Lige.
All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in today. We have kind of a special treat.
Yes. So we mentioned earlier Open Owl Studios, and we have Nathan on with us today, Nathan Lige. And Nathan, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself? Where are you based? Did you grow up in a household with board games, or did it become a hobby later in life? And your history with board games thrown in there would be great.
Sure, yeah. So I live in Kelowna, British Columbia now, which is in the Pacific Northwest. And as far as gaming goes, I kind of think of it in a couple of different ways. Like I grew up in a big sports family, and I know that that's not typically kind of a route people think of into gaming, but you're playing a game. You know, there are rules that you follow, and so that definitely was one avenue. And then we played a lot of card games growing up, lots of crib and rummy and games like that. So that was always my inroad. Those were the games I could play with other people.
Right.
I think the first game I remember being really excited about was the original Fireball Island.
Okay.
Yes.
And it was this giant box. It had the what do they call it? Sort of like vacuum formed board that was like had like ridges to it, and it looked like rocks and everything.
Oh, yeah, like the thinnest plastic in the world, but really great.
Yeah.
For 1986
actually,
or whatever.
Yeah, well, totally, and quite big in area that it would take up.
Mm-hmm.
So as an 8-year-old, 9-year-old that I was at the time, that definitely captured my imagination. And I think I've always been kind of chasing the potential of a game like that, because there's there's sort of this big experience where you're running around and dodging lava and fireballs and stuff, and that's not really what the game ends up feeling like. You're rolling a dice and moving around,
Right.
but there's that sort of exciting premise that exists, right?
Yes.
So I think that captured my imagination, and I've sort of been chasing that ever since.
Yeah, I think the best thing about that game and games of that era were the commercials.
Yes.
They made it, and they made it so cool, like Crossfire, and like you just wanted it, and
So badly,
Yeah.
yes.
such a great thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Nathan, can you, like we said, you work for Open Owl Studios. Can you just kind of explain your role there and like what you do?
Yeah, as soon as I figure it out, I'll tell you.
Okay, great. I'm in the same boat at my job
just kidding.
sometimes.
No, my official title is designer, but we're, like I'm sure most indie game companies are a pretty small operation. So really, if it needs to get done, I'll certainly chip in. But most of my responsibilities revolve around game development, game design. Mythwind certainly took up a huge chunk of my time over the last, 3 years now,
Wow.
really. And even now, as we're wrapping up to a Kickstarter, we're working on supporting the community that has the game. We're working on new expansions and stuff. So there's a lot of writing, a lot of rule writing, a lot of just sort of game balancing and development, that kind of stuff. And working on other projects too that we haven't announced yet. But just definitely on the creative side of making the games happen. So again, short answer is I'm a game
Sure.
designer, but it's a little more varied than
Yeah,
that.
and can you explain maybe just a little bit more of your history and how you became a game designer? I think it's something that Angela and I have always been a little interested in.
It seems so mysterious. Like, how
Yeah,
does one
Yeah.
become?
yeah. So like, just really quick, kind of like history on how you got to where you are.
Yeah, you know, I have to say a lot of it in my case is just good fortune, kind of being in the right place at the right time. So at the time when the company was referred to as
Mm.
Games, their first big Kickstarter was Stars of Ikarios,
Mm-hmm.
and somebody I knew, a good friend, was had a writing contract with them, and he had overextended himself. He could not fulfill the contract, so he brought me in, and I at the time was working. I had just finished working project management in Wi-Fi for hospitality, so like not board game adjacent whatsoever.
Right.
But it definitely was pursuing, was in the hobby, very much enjoyed board games. In my free time, he and I would do, work on developing our own stuff, never really thinking like this is going to be a career. But when he needed a hand, I jumped in, and I kind of thought that I would be jumping in kind of more of like a project management kind of mode. But I realized pretty quickly that what they needed was a writer. So I just started writing stuff, and Brendan never turned it down. So I just kind of kept writing,
Okay.
and we got the story, and we ended up bringing in a couple of other writers, but I ran the team, so I became kind of the de facto writer on Stars of Ikarios, um, and through that developed a good relationship with Brendan. And so when he had the idea for Mythwind kind of percolating, because of that good working relationship, he asked to bring me on, like if I'd be interested to come on as a full-time designer. And I don't think he finished the question before I said yes. So
Yeah, I feel like
um,
that's one that you can't
yeah.
hesitate on.
No, yeah.
Well, exactly. I mean, the funny thing is you never really know how it's going to go, or like what kind of stability there is. Like I have my own family with kids and everything. But this was pretty early days in like COVID, and so I was ready to kind of take anything. But the fact that it happened to be in the hobby that I love was very exciting. And from my point of view, the collaboration had been really good too. Like a lot of the writing in Stars of Ikarios. Maybe I should explain what the game is. It's this very long sci-fi campaign game where you're flying ships around, and all your missions are kind of tactical ship combat. But in between every mission is a story. And so by the time we were done, we had written a novel essentially that was. I remember the original word count was like longer than like the Hunger Games.
Oh man.
So we had written a lot, but there was a lot of collaboration, of course, and like what where does the story need to go for the missions that are happening, and what is the story suggesting can happen within the context of the game, kind of a thing. So because the game was so story heavy, there was a lot of back and forth, story informed mechanics, and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
And because that dynamic was good, I was really excited about that collaboration with Mythwind. And I think from Brendan's point of view, he had just finished designing this really big game in Stars of Ikarios and had a lot of other responsibilities too. And he was looking for someone to kind of lighten his design load.
Sure.
And so that's where I came in.
That's awesome. I'm looking like we did a little research on like obviously the other games that Open Owl has done, and I was just shocked at the description on BGG for Ikarios. It says a 200-page scenario book. It's like
200.
Yeah.
It's so crazy.
Yeah.
that's
Probably too long, if I'm being totally
okay.
honest. And in fact, with the reprint, we try to tighten it up a little bit, but it's still very long. And some of the fun thing about a game like that is the fans who love it really love it, and I love hearing about the people who play through the whole thing. Some people like that's been their only game for a year with like a group of
Oh,
Wow.
friends. They
wow.
just hit that campaign hard, and so yeah, it's super rewarding to see, or to rather to hear that kind of feedback.
Oh, that's great. I feel, yeah, that is, like you said, comparing, most people don't think of it as a writing job, maybe, but
Mhm.
I mean, 200-page scenario book, that's right up there, well, with what you said, Hunger Games.
Yeah, it's a book in itself for sure.
Well, we are definitely a story forward studio, and Stars of Chaos is very story forward. Mythwind, I definitely didn't want to write another campaign book.
Yeah.
So instead, we wrote a story all in event cards, which was very kind of complicated to kind of make everything work. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to play Mythwind yet, but
we have seen people play it.
Yeah, we haven't, but we've had similar game, like the Crossroads games that do like a bunch of story elements in cards. So,
right.
I'm assuming the beats are similar.
Yeah, similar idea. There are I think over 80 adventure cards that all kind of give you a choice what to do, and that can trigger other stuff happening. And then there's 150 event cards, I want to say, plus the expansions. And the challenging thing about that was just that you don't get all that stuff in every playthrough. It sort of all branches off. So just constantly trying to having to manage that everything kind of flows properly and correctly. And if we say like shuffle on this event card, we make sure that we give you the correct event card. And of course, halfway through the project, we kind of reset the numbers, which like really was tough to kind of go back and make sure we got everything right. And but yeah, writing is definitely a big part of the job for sure.
Yeah, that's great.
So the big news, as you mentioned, Stars of Ikarios has been out, and the big news now is that there's a reprint of Mythwind coming on Kickstarter. And then for those who have never played Mythwind, maybe never seen the box even, can you just give us like a high, like 5,000 foot view of what the game is and what type of game it is? I'm guessing it's cooperative because of your studio, and who the target audience is.
Yeah, so there's actually a very easy hook with Mythwind. It is cooperative. You can play solo. It is a very cozy setting. In that there is no winning or losing, and it is a game that you can save between sessions. So those are all pretty unique things about it.
Yeah, that's great. I think when Angela and I first started playing board games, the concept of a co-op game was so foreign.
Yeah, but it saved our marriage.
That's true. There's a lot of on both ends, I'll say, sore losing.
Well, mostly me. I feel like you don't often, I can't think off the top of my head another company that you only do cooperative, correct, at Open Owl Studios?
Yeah, that's definitely been our MO so far. Okay. Maybe not forever. Like I'm someone who likes a competitive game, but so far it's all co-op all the time for sure.
Okay, yeah, that's awesome. And I think it's a great entry point for a lot of people too. Hey, come to my house, play this game. We'll win or lose together. We're not. No one's going home in tears. Maybe all of us are going home in tears.
Well, and then, like you mentioned with Mythwind, it's open. It's not win or lose even. So that's cool.
Which is a difficult concept for some people to kind of wrap their heads around, because it's really just about play for the sake of play. And some of the questions we'll get are like, okay, but like, how do I succeed? Like, how do I know if I'm doing it right? You know what I mean? So, it's and part of the reason why we did it is because we haven't really seen this kind of experience in the board game space.
No.
And we wanted to allow for people to just sort of play. Like they didn't need to stop the virus from killing the world or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Like, so because a lot of co-op games are usually you against the board, right? Like there's some sort of system that you're trying to overcome.
Yes.
And we wanted to create a system that has a little bit of churn, but that you really kind of get your good feeling from just sort of growing and improving and like that.
Oh,
that's great.
Yeah.
And you did mention it right off the bat as a cozy game. Coming from someone who plays enough video games to know that those are like really hot right now in the video game world. So like games like Stardew Valley, Animal Crossing, Cozy Grove, there's so many of them. Was it kind of like, were those games kind of like an inspiration for this type of board game?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when, so like, again, Brendan came to me. So the genesis of the idea came from him. And Stardew Valley was definitely, I think, kind of the light bulb moment where he just sort of realized there weren't any board games that were doing that thing where you kind of just, you wander around, you go in there, you talk to that person, plant some things in your garden. You know, like there's no like there's no kind of impetus to do one thing necessarily. So those are definitely an influence, and my inroads into that goes back to Harvest Moon,
Yeah.
which is like an old Super Nintendo
Yep.
game, and I'm kind of giving my generation away here, but
I'm with you on that one.
Oh, yeah.
yeah, exactly. So my understanding is the Stardew Valley crew were heavily influenced by that game, and so as soon as I tried Stardew Valley, because I hadn't up to that point, I was like, "Oh, this feels very familiar."
Yeah, that's awesome.
So we touched on it before, but Christian and I, have been so intrigued recently by game design and what it takes to like make an idea around, the dinner table become a reality. And so we would love if you could take us through like the game development process, specifically for Mythwind. What was it like from, I guess you said Brendan came up with the concept or brought it to you till, launch?
Hmm. Yeah, so you start with a lot of discussions,
Yeah.
a lot of brainstorming, because with this, we had that premise, and he came in with sort of a singular idea. So, what the game is now, just to kind of give a bit of context to people, is a game where you're building a town, and you've been brought into this valley by these local sprites, these magical creatures, and all of the players take on different roles. And so you might be a farmer or a crafter or a ranger, or a merchant, and you contribute to building this town through like your specific expertise. And this kind of the original starting point was really just the farmer would be what everybody is. Everyone's a farmer.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point in the brainstorming there, we sort of realized this could work really well as like a game that is, for one, expandable, like a game that you can really kind of plug different characters in and out of. If the town operates as like the center of a sort of wheel spoke, and all the characters are plug and play. So one thing about Mythwind is you can play a season as the farmer, and then if you want to, you can switch to the crafter or then the ranger or whatever. And that's been I think one of the big appeals of the game is that one, you can save the town, change characters, and you're not like the town stays the same.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great.
So that kind of brainstorming got us to an interesting place. But then the design of making that happen was a huge challenge. And so for me, I'm sure one of the kind of sparks of the idea came from Root, for example. Like, I really enjoy Root.
Yeah,
That's a
one
game
of
that
our
has
favorites for
Yeah.
sure.
yeah, right. And so that idea of like having asymmetric factions, we thought it'd be really interesting if, like, depending on the unique role that you have, your mechanics for your character are asymmetric, that are hopefully kind of reflective of how that role works, for example. So, like for the crafter, you are working on materials in your workshop, and once they're ready, you can turn them into a good that people have requested for, like a backpack or a hammer or something like that. And the farmer's always planting crops, tending them, and then harvesting them, and they kind of have that cycle kind of a thing. So, all that in the brainstorming is really easy to not easy to come up with, but it's like it's a really kind of fertile place to come to in brainstorming.
Sure.
But when you sit down to actually work out the logistics of doing it, I realized pretty quickly we've created really 6 games rather than just one. Like
Yeah.
the town functions as a thing, and then each character, and we're also designing an expansion character at the same
Okay.
time.
Wow.
So there's like they're all kind of their own mechanics we have to work out, and we have to try to do it in such a way that they scale in a similar fashion, at least like reasonably so.
Sure.
Because the game we knew right away we wanted it to be not competitive or like not even winnable or losable. That does take a lot of the edge off of balance, because for example, if a character is easier to play, that's a great character for the kids to take part
Yep.
in, or someone who's like a light gamer kind of a thing. So there are advantages to having some characters who do accelerate really quickly. So all this stuff, there's all these kind of crazy ingredients. We're like, oh yeah, let's pull that off the shelf, and let's pull that off the shelf. And I once played a game where I really enjoyed doing that kind of thing. And then you kind of go about the business of like figuring out what is kind of the minimum version of the fun version of this game. Like you kind of have to start stripping a lot of stuff away. So the development process was really long, just trying to sort all that out. Really the first thing was like, okay, how does the town work? Okay, and then let's focus on one character. How does the farmer work? And then the crafter. And once we had 2 characters and we could start playtesting, then it was kind of like, okay, we know we've got something here that works. And from then on, it was really about designing the other characters to kind of match and make sure they work. So, I mean, this is all just the development side. This isn't even the writing part of it. We can talk about like how do we want the event cards to work? Because we're pretty sure we knew we wanted to have a story. So we developed this sort of weather deck that was like essentially a turn counter, and that would trigger event cards being read, or you would have to have a certain amount of time, and then there's a trigger for the buildings to get built. So when you build the building, it doesn't happen right away. It takes time for it to get worked on. So there's just all these interlocking mechanics that take a while to kind of sort out, and again, that's really just the development side. I don't know how far you want to kind of go in the
That's
production
great.
bit.
I think it's awesome. I know that like there's a lot that goes into it all, and I think what intrigues us most about the game for us is like we like the asymmetry.
Yeah.
And so like I'm looking at the farmer and I'm like, this is for me. Like I'll play Tetris with crops all day, and like Angela's probably looking at something else that I don't even know.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the merchant.
Like we're gonna sell stuff, and then like story is so fun and important to us because we like telling that shared story when we're sitting down at the table. So that's pretty great.
Yeah, because we try not to stray too far from why we got into board games in the first place. Was what is to have fun with each other, like with each other as a couple, and not just sit and watch Netflix.
Right.
Yeah. So this sounds,
I hear that.
so intriguing. And I mean, just for the listeners out there, I've been following along recently on their Instagram stories, Open Owl Studios, and one of we've had her on the podcast before. Natalie, Board Gamer Girl, has been walking through turns and choices in the game, and it's just so relaxing, but also intriguing. And yes, so it's very it's very much high on the interest level for us.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool.
Back to the Kickstarter. It's coming soon. Do you want to say when it is coming? It's the end of March, correct?
Yeah, Tuesday, March 26th is the date, and so it essentially will be a reprint, and we're gonna have another expansion in there called Friends and Family. So I don't know if you want me to kind of
that was going to be my next question. If there was going to be new content, and if you can give us sprinkle in a little spoilers or just talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, the reprint will essentially just be a reprint. One thing we're doing is that we're taking some of the frequently asked questions that we've heard from the community, and we're using that to kind of clarify some points in the rule book.
Okay.
But the game will be the game. It's not changing. And the existing expansion, Expanded Horizons, will be available. But there's a new expansion we're doing called Friends and Family. And what we're wanting to get out of that is just sort of creating a feeling of people living in the town that you're building.
Okay.
So essentially what happens with that expansion is that you're going to be building buildings like you do in the regular game, but there will be villager characters who exist in those buildings, and you'll be able to build your relationships with them. So hopefully it'll feel a bit more like a community that's growing, as well as just these buildings that you're placing on the map.
Okay.
And we're going to introduce some more mechanics that will allow for interactivity between the characters, which is definitely something that we would have liked to have done the first time around. But again, there's only kind of so many ideas you can cram into the first core box.
Yeah.
And like I said, the development experience already was, 2 years long or whatever it was. So with the game fulfilling and getting kind of a step back and hearing some of the feedback from the community, we're like, okay, well, let's tackle this idea of interaction again. And so what we're going to do now is if you're playing with a farmer, you can go buy a crop off of them, and you're going to have this crop, and it'll give you almost like a kind of a power boost kind of thing. Like you'll be able to do more stuff with it. You'll be able to do more of what you already do.
Okay.
Nice.
Or you can go to the crafter and ask them to make something for you, and that item, once it's done, will give you like an extra action or some kind of benefit. Okay. The ranger, you can ask them to go while they're on their next expedition. Ranger's kind of a unique character that actually leaves the town and they'll kind of go wander in the woods. So you can ask them to go, essentially go find stuff for you, and then that'll have positive benefits for you, kind of a thing. So it's this idea that you're going to go to the different characters and use what they were already doing, what's already part of their mechanics, but you'll get a benefit out of it, and they'll get a benefit out of it too. But it's not necessarily about that for them. It's just about supporting the other people at the table.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
and it does. I mean, I don't know that you're saying that it's geared towards kids, but I like that you mentioned earlier that you could, put a family around the table and you could put a kid in one of the roles, or that just appeals to us a lot with we have 2 kids, so we like to and they're both in upper elementary, but it's fun to get them involved in games too.
It's a funny thing with board games, because I'm never sure what to recommend, because everybody's kids have a varying level of interest, a varying level of appetite for mechanics. But I've certainly heard people on our Discord channel talk about bringing their 8-year-old to the table and play. The thing with the characters is they kind of play their own game too. They don't even need to interact with the town. They can just work those polyomino crops for the farmer.
Yeah.
Until they're blue in the face. So there's no downside, because you're not going to lose. So yeah, why not?
Why not? Yeah, it's all about the experience.
Yeah, I like the idea too. In the new content, you said how you're gonna have basically, I guess you'd call them like NPCs that show up with specific buildings. Are they going to be like specific characters tied to a building, or is it going to be like a different random deck of cards based on what was built?
So they'll be affiliated with a particular building, and so I don't have. I'm trying to see if I've got my spreadsheets handy. Let's say you build like I'm trying to think of an example here really quickly. Let's say the trading post, I think, has a character. You build the trading post, and there's a specific character that will be kind of come with it.
Okay.
And then this character, every time you go to the trading post, you can also decide to have like a social gathering with them. And one of the other things that is sort of more connective about that too is, let's say the 3 of us are playing, and I go to that trading post. You guys can also join me in going to this gathering, and the more of us that go, the more likely we're going to build our friendship with that character.
Okay.
And ultimately, you can get to the point where you can become really close friends with them, and essentially they'll give you like a sort of an extra action you can do. Some characters you can even marry. We're looking at kind of figuring out we're going to have some kind of mechanic in there for kids, if that's something people want to have with these characters that they've married. So
I love it.
Yeah. Just trying to build more of that sense of building a life. Right?
Yeah, that's so cool. All right. Well, Angela mentioned but I think before we started chatting that one thing we like to do on the show is we kind of break down a game into like specific categories. And we would love, Brendan, if we could just kind of throw you a question or a category that we like to talk about. And if you could just give like a quick response to how Mythwind fits in these categories.
Sure.
So what we talk about on our show is setup and tear down. As parents, we don't have sometimes a ton of time to get a game to the table after kids go to bed or whatever. One thing we loved about looking at Mythwind is that you have game trays.
Yes.
Which makes the world so much better. But can you kind of explain, like, where do you feel like Mythwind fits in that process? I know there's a process for saving the town that looks super simple. Can you just kind of like explain all that really quickly?
For a game this big, I'm comfortable saying that it is the most innovative game out there for setup and tear down. In that, if you're playing as a farmer, you are done. You put the stuff you're not using into the kind of storage compartments. You put a lid on the farmer. That takes about 2 minutes, and you're done. You're done with the town. You stack the 3 town pieces on top of each other. You put a lid on them, and that's saved.
Yeah.
Put those in the box, and that's it. That's your teardown.
That's crazy.
So
I love that.
It happens super fast. Yeah, and then setup is the reverse of that, which is maybe a little bit longer because you're organizing where you're pulling stuff out, but it's all done within 5 minutes.
Yeah, and this is not a tiny box. For those of you that have never seen the box, and it kind of, not exactly, but usually the box and it's the game size indicates a more complicated setup or a longer setup. So, like you said, you're confident in saying that, and I would agree.
Yeah, the amount of times that we've been like, all right, let's play a game, and then we set it up, and that takes 35 minutes, and then we're like, you know what, we're not going to play this anymore.
Right. Right.
Yeah, it's the main challenge for me when playing like campaign games, and there's a lot of them that I enjoy, but that setup time is enough to stop me from even opening the box up.
Totally.
Sure.
So, yeah. So this was, I have to give a lot of credit to Brendan. Like this was really his vision, and working with Bryce at Game Trays, and we like all of that. To go back to the design conversation, our design also included how can we make the gameplay function within these trays so that when you're done, you just stop your gameplay right where you are, put a lid on, and then you've essentially paused it. Right?
Yeah, having the tray as the player board is super unique and super cool.
Love that.
Yeah.
So we alluded to this earlier with the cooperative nature, but how easy do you think it would be for someone either who's been into modern board games but never played Mythwind, or is just interested in the story element and isn't necessarily into modern board games? How accessible would it be for them to learn this game?
Well, I will say that there is a decent amount of rules overhead to learn at the beginning, but I think once you get the flow going, it makes sense. And so, obviously you mentioned that you play route. One of the challenges for me with a game that's asymmetric is just having to teach each individual character separately.
Yep.
Yes.
But we do have like a reference on the back. Every character has their own journal, and we have a reference on the back that at least leads them through the flow and gives them an iconography guide. We are going to be including in the reprint a player reference that kind of gives more of a more complete kind of flow for each character in terms of like, here's what happens in town right now. Here's what happens when you're leaving town and you're doing your character action. Like, so we've heard from the community that sometimes they do have to reference the journal a lot. So we're going to try to make it a little bit easier for them to just kind of stick in the flow of the game. It's not like a super simple answer because it's a different experience for everybody.
Totally.
Some people really take to a rule book, and some people really bounce off of a rule book. And I'm generally quite happy with where it is. And I'm going to shout out. We brought in someone by the name of Adam Baker who used to work for Fantasy Flight.
Okay.
And Brendan and I struggled through, 5 different versions of the rule books, and should we do the tutorial, and should we do one big rule book or separate ones, kind of a thing. And it took Adam coming in to really kind of crystallize how the best way to do it, at least in our opinion. And so like a game that is this ambitious is tricky to teach, but you can get there. I'd say by the time you play through one season, you probably have a very good handle on your character and the flow of the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, if you have someone who's played the game, at least one person at the table, that will probably help. Yeah,
and they can manage all of the town stuff. I mean, which isn't in itself very complicated, but they can, for example, prompt the event cards. They can prompt the weather deck. They can kind of guide people towards the right buildings that make sense to work on, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
And if you're a new player, you can just focus on your own character if you really want to.
In our situation, that would be Angela.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
She runs the games whenever there's a game to be like run, cards to flip, stuff to do. She loves doing that, and I'm just stuck. Not stuck, but I choose to just look at my board and decide what I'm going to do or how I'm going to lose.
Well, you're in it for the story, which leads into our next category.
Yeah, that's very true.
So do you want to lead in, Christian?
Yeah, so like we enjoy thematic games, and you've kind of touched on it throughout the conversation already, but like it sounds funny to just say how thematic is Mythwind. I mean, it just looks and sounds thematic based on the conversation we've already had. Can you just say anything else about like the world it builds, the game, and how the game itself builds that world, if that makes sense?
Yeah, totally. So because the game is a again, a cooperative game with no win or lose condition, we knew we wanted story to kind of help create the why for, why you're there, to give it some purpose. And the setting is, as I alluded to, like you are essentially people. I kind of think of it as like a sort of like mid 18th century setting for at least the humans,
Yeah.
and they've been invited into this valley that seems untouched to them by these sprite characters, and they're not clear as to exactly why. As you go through the story, you sort of see why they needed the help, why they needed people there. One of the things you discover as soon as you show up is that there are foundations of other buildings there that are from a previous time. Specifically, there's this large kind of a dormant dark tower that's there. And again, all through the story, you sort of figure out like why that stuff is there and what's happening. But the setting is full of animals that are kind of familiar, but a little bit different, a little magical.
Mm-hmm.
And there are, I think, 6 different types of sprites that they're the characters you interact with the most. And in fact, mechanically in the game, your helpers are either villagers, which are orange dice, or sprites, which are blue dice. And a lot of what you do is sort of affiliated as a sort of a villager action or a sprite action. And that's kind of the yin and yang throughout the whole experience.
Yes, I mean, again, listeners, if you have not seen this game with your eyes, you need to just lay your eyes on it. It just looks like you're, diving into a world.
Yeah. Totally.
So, how now this is the most obviously subjective question, but we like to say how fun is a game, but also clarify like what kind of fun, because Christian is someone that is like a party game, or like what people would maybe observe from the outside looking in. Is fun is laughter and like discussion and talking, and I can have fun with that too, but I also find like challenges and brain teasers and things like that fun. So how fun is the game, but also what kind of fun?
Well, I'll start with the second one first, because I think that already, if someone hears the idea of a game you can't win or lose, they'll probably already have a sense of whether or not this is their kind of fun.
Totally.
Because some people, they need something to overcome, or they need someone to beat, or whatever it is. Like they need that competitive edge. And this game is not that. This game is definitely about taking your time, sort of luxuriating in the experience, and it is a lot of like gaming mechanisms. I could say like Euro mechanisms, Euro type of mechanisms that are sort of layered on top of each other, and so that'll be fun for some people and not for others. And I fully expected when we ship this game that a lot of people will get it and be like, hold on a second, like what is this weird thing? But the response has actually been really strong, and a lot of people, even if it doesn't appeal to them, they really appreciate the sort of the premise of the game, or at least what we were going for, the sort of open-ended, ongoing game. So I think that idea is so singular that most people are going to at least know if they're intrigued by it.
Yes.
In terms of how fun it is, I mean, I don't know how to answer that for other people necessarily.
It's a funny question, for sure.
Right. I mean, I think so. Here's one of the things that I think it has going for it. If you play a character like the merchant, say, and you're like, this is dull as dishwater, you can switch to a different character and find that one really sings for you. And that's definitely happened where like we'll hear from different players who are like, oh, the crafter is the worst. It's super repetitive. Another person's like, that's my favorite character. So, I mean, it's one of the advantages of having these asymmetric characters, and you can kind of jump around and see what you like, and that experience of discovery is interesting as well. But for the people who are the fans, obviously they have found 1 or 2 characters or more that they really gravitate towards, and on top of that, there's the shared experience of the town and the story you're working through. So I think that if you like the idea of building something with other people, or maybe this is more of a solo experience for you, which I think that this game works particularly well solo. So that's also another kind of lane if that's a way that you play. I'm actually not typically a solo player, but just the way we designed it, it scales from down to one very seamlessly.
Yeah,
I
it's
think.
such a
Um,
huge market, especially after 2020 COVID. Like
yeah,
everyone's doing solo games. Angela's our solo player.
I love solo
right.
Yeah.
games because then I can
Yeah.
make all the decisions.
Well, I think too, like thematically, what this game is, or sort of the feeling I think of what this game is all about, that kind of cozy feeling for a lot of people who are, let's say, introverted.
Mhm.
It's pretty nice to kind of just set a game up super easily, grab the character you want to play, and just kind of take your time with it and play for 30 minutes or 2 hours or whatever. And when you're done, you're done. So that kind of no pressure gaming is again a different kind of fun.
Yeah. That's
It's
I think that's a good way to describe it. No pressure gaming.
yes,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there's so many games that maybe are right up, right there with Mythwind in terms of like the immersive experience, but you don't get time to explore the world because you've got to get
Right.
something done. So
Hmm.
something bad's coming and you can't explore, you can't do everything, like don't search there.
Hmm.
We need to hightail it out of here. So I feel
Yeah.
like that is intriguing even for this self-described competitive person over here. So how replayable is this game? I mean, I think I have a very clear idea in
Yeah.
my head, but plug it one more time.
Sure. It's a game that has no ending, so you can play it as long as you
That's
want.
crazy.
Yeah. So I guess the honest answer is it's really as replayable as long as you find the characters that you're um, playing with interesting. As long as you feel like you're doing like the town is growing in a way that's interesting to you. The story is actually there's a lot to the story, and one thing I'll say is that if when we were originally designing the game, we've got kind of this growth, kind of scaling growth curve that we have in mind for the characters.
Hmm.
And as we have, kind of keep iterating through it, we're kind of tightening that all the time. We're bringing it down because we want that sort of, let's make that endorphin hit a little more frequent.
Mm.
And so as we get closer to the end, we sort of realize we have these characters that scale up at a certain speed, but we still have this story that we planned out that takes quite a long time to get through. So some people will look at the story as a natural ending, and you may need to like switch characters to get the full life out of them in order to kind of get to the end of the story, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So I think for a lot of people, the end point of the story would be a natural end point, but there's no. We say in the rule book that you don't have to stop there. You can keep playing if you want without the story. Yeah. So it's when you don't define when the game's over, the game's never over, I
Yeah.
guess.
Totally.
It's
That's
blowing our minds because we can't think of anything, like that out there. And it's something to get used to, I think, and not in a. It's not putting me off even as a competitive player. It's just more and more intriguing as to like what would that look like for me? Because everything is about competition, usually,
Mhm.
even if it's against the game.
right.
Mhm.
Um, all right. Well, we're going to do a closing segment where we ask some quick fire questions, but is there
Sure.
anything we would love for you to like say anything else about Mythwind or just plug where people could find information about Mythwind or
The Kickstarter for
specifically
sure.
or just Open Owl Studios in general and let them know that.
Yeah, we have the Kickstarter page up already, so anybody who wants to can go find Mythwind on there. And you can I always forget the terminology they use, but you can follow the page so you'll get the heads up when the campaign goes live. It'll be early on March 26th. Brendan likes to get going like as early as possible and watch those numbers climb.
Yeah, that's
So
got to be fun.
it is. It's nerve-wracking for
Yeah.
sure. You really don't know how it's going to go, and usually those first 2 hours, at least like I've been around for the Stars of Icarus reprint and this Mythwind campaign, and those first 2 hours are a real rush because thankfully we've been really well supported.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and so obviously we're hoping for more of the same here. But it's like, so the night before you really have no idea, and you're on pins and needles. So
Yeah.
so yeah, it's exciting, and we really believe in what we're building out here. I think you know, I think that we probably have lots of room to continue to make games that have like the saving feature, you know, or have like certain aspects of this. Like we've learned a lot from this experience, and I'll just say that you know we've got a few things on the slate this year. I know some people have backed Stone Saga. That's going to fulfill. Well, I don't know exactly what it'll fulfill. I'm not on that project, but I expect later this year. And then we've got some other campaigns coming up too that are also very story forward. There's another project I'm working on that I'd love to talk about, but I can't yet.
Those are the best kind.
But there are some.
I know.
I know. It's. I'll just say it's like a storybook come to life. That's as much as I'll say about it. But that's a thing that we'll be announcing probably quite soon. We're hoping to have something to show by Gen Con.
Great.
And so yeah, if story games are interesting, keep tabs on us because we'll have some exciting announcements this year.
Awesome. Yeah, Stone Saga, that's the survival one, right?
Yeah, it's sort of almost like a prehistoric type of setting. You play through sagas, like there's generations essentially that you play through, and how you play your. Again, I haven't played it, so some of my terminology might be off, but your tribe sort of evolves and changes as you play through these sagas, and there's all these kind of neat different challenges you have. Yeah. So, anyways, there's
another one. Another one to add to the list.
Exactly. And you know, if that is received well, and we were actually quite confident in it, I would expect that also will at some point be made available again via crowdfunding.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Brendan, we thank you for talking about Mythwind. We're all looking forward to Nathan. What did I say?
Brendan. I think you're looking at his name.
I'm looking at like bad notes. So I apologize.
You got the last two letters.
There you go.
He's giving you credit.
Nathan. I know like 7 Nathans. It should be easy.
You do.
To hit it. Talking about Mythwind, we're going to have links in our show notes to the Kickstarters, like you said, to Open Owl Studios. And so our listeners can find all that stuff there. And as we wrap up our show, we do like to talk about board game adjacent stuff, maybe some things outside of board games. So we thought it'd be fun to ask you, as our guest, a couple questions that we usually answer ourselves at the end of the show. But the first one that I wanted to ask about is about board games, and maybe you don't even have time right now to play other board games with this reprint coming. But do you have any current favorite games that you're playing?
Yeah. So I'm never going to give up at least my weekly game night. That's
okay.
Good for you.
To me, so yeah. So I'll mention 2 games if that's okay.
Yeah.
One I played really recently is called Soul: Last Days of the Star. Have you heard of that one before?
Oh, I haven't. Have you heard of it?
I've heard of it, but I have not looked into it.
Okay.
The name is familiar.
Yeah. Very cool game by, I believe they're an independent group out of Seattle, I want to say, called Elephant Laboratories. But it is a game where the premise is that you're escaping an imploding sun, and you need to build up momentum to get out of the galaxy. And it's got really simple mechanics, but there's this one really basic twist that totally kind of throws everything on its head. And it's this idea that your mothership is like orbiting around this imploding sun. So when you're dropping ships off, you're kind of leaving them behind. And those little ships are essentially your workers that you do all the actions. So you're constantly having to plan out okay, well, my mothership in 3 turns is going to be over there. How can I set myself up to take advantage of my workers I'm going to drop off over there? And you're just constantly orbiting the sun, but you're working on stuff and you have to kind of wait to get back around to where you worked on stuff before. It's
okay.
Super simple, but makes for a really fun challenge. So I played it 3 times in the last couple of weeks, and I'm really digging that one right now. And then the other one I'll mention the game that I picked up during COVID and I have not put down since is Unmatched. And the reason that was so great was because it plays 2 players, and I was basically just seeing my family. And so my brother-in-law is a frequent gamer, and so we've just played the heck out of that. And so what we're doing right now is we've created, there's 46 characters or something like that. So we've created a whole kind of tournament with seeding and brackets and everything, and we're working through a big Unmatched tournament with 4 people. So that's.
Do you have a favorite set? Because there are so many.
Yeah, I mean, usually every set has got like one or two favorite
Okay.
characters. And I part of the reason I jumped in is when I saw there was a Bruce Lee character, and I love playing with Bruce
Okay.
Lee. Just all the combos.
Yeah.
The Cobble and Fog set is really fun. And Daredevil is probably my favorite Marvel character.
Yeah.
So there's a Hell's Kitchen set that has Daredevil and Bullseye and Elektra. And Elektra is the bane of my existence, but I do love Daredevil.
I have the Jurassic Park ones.
They're
So
right behind us right now.
the
Yeah.
two Jurassic Park ones. Those
Yep.
are the only sets I have. I just had to because Jurassic Park.
Yeah,
And I think
I love playing the
yeah,
Raptors.
I do need to play that one more. So that's a good reminder.
That is a
for
good
myself.
reminder.
All right, Angela, do you want to ask him our one we ask each other, and we'll answer this too?
Yeah, so we would love to know what is bringing you joy outside of board games? And that sounds like it's really deep and profound, and it certainly can be. If you have a deep and profound answer, we welcome it. But it can also just be coffee. Anything that's bringing you joy outside of board games currently, we would love to know.
Yeah, so I'll give you a couple of answers because I mean they're both family related, and I love anything that kind of gets me outside. And one thing that work does because I work from home, which is again a kind of a new post-COVID reality. I spend a lot of time on the computer. I'm basically in the basement in a little office by myself. So I need to get outside more and more often. And over Christmas, we got a basketball hoop. And so, usually about once a day, I go outside with my son and shoot some hoops. And that's it is a simple thing. But that 20 to 30 minutes is, it's a literal breath of fresh air, really kind of breaks up the day.
Totally.
And that's an activity that I played tons of basketball when I was younger. So I really love it. So, and then the other thing I'll mention is, just I'll say it is giving me joy even while it's punished me, and that's I've started doing CrossFit since January.
Okay.
And I did it this morning. I felt sick afterwards, but there's a couple of things. One, I'm doing it with my wife, so I love getting to spend time with her doing that. And I'm glad I'm not competitive in that arena because she's kicking my
Yeah.
butt. And just sort of the good feeling that comes from sticking with it and feeling physical improvement after it's only been 3 months.
That's a long time.
So
yeah, I mean, keeping with it. I mean, what's the statistic about January people start goals and then
Yeah.
lose it after 4-6 weeks? So
well, I think they say it takes about 3 months to build a habit and 2 weeks to lose it or something like that.
Wild. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Well, Angela and I might be joining you in the fitness challenge. My work is starting a fitness challenge
yes,
tomorrow
Good.
for 100
Wow.
100 days, and they have metrics set up, and so like they invited the spouses to join, and
yeah.
so we'll see where it goes. Maybe we'll talk in 3 months, and we'll be sore as well. So,
What sort of challenges do you have to?
so this is just more
do.
like it's more like a daily thing. So if you they want you to do it every day for 100 days straight. They want you to do 30 or at minimum 10 minutes.
Maximum of 60 minutes.
Yep.
Like for that will count towards the competition.
Yep, and then also a calorie goal.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, and so like I work for a fairly small tech company. We have like 65 employees, and so like we just kind of do this every year before our summer staff retreat where we all get together and hang out for a weekend. So
Oh, cool.
kind of just to get us. Not like beach ready, but
I think we are trying to get this beach ready. Yeah, it's a subtle.
Like I work from home 60% of the time, so I'm in my little basement, office doing not much, and we're sitting on computers all day. So I feel that too.
Yes.
Well, it sounds like you're building good habits.
Well, we'll see.
We'll see.
We'll see starting tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah.
Angela, how about you? What's bringing you joy?
Oh man, well I am drinking coffee right now, but I will say that this cereal milk candle is bringing me joy. I wish that I could send a smell through the podcast because this whole time I've been smelling it and it just smells like, is it more like a Fruit Loop smell?
It would be like if you put Fruity Pebbles in milk and then left it there for 20 minutes.
Wow.
And this is not like a normal thing where I would think, oh, that's a scent I'd like.
Yeah.
But it's bringing me joy. And we're talking about this, like, we've got a candle. We're talking about this cozy game, Mythwind.
I know.
I've got my
I'm
coffee.
surprised you don't have
It's
a Blinky.
Yeah. All the feels.
Yeah.
That sounds very cozy.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Nathan. This has been
Well, I'm gonna
amazing.
go. I think I should tell everyone.
I thought you didn't go.
No, I didn't. Come on, Ange.
I was you know what I was doing? I was phasing you out.
That's right. Competition. Well, thanks for asking, Angela. What's bringing me joy has been Helldivers 2.
Oh,
There's a group.
yes.
Yeah, there's a group of us from work that have been playing that once a week, and we have a really good time. If you're not playing that game and you like video games, check it out. It's Starship Troopers, the video game, basically, and it's just wild.
That's cool. I haven't had a chance to play it. I've heard good things. I've heard it described in that way as well, which is kind of ironic because I just rewatched Starship Troopers like a week and a half
That's
ago.
so funny. Like the beginning is just straight out of the movie. It's just so campy and weird, and like
that's fun.
Yeah, and then you can either fight like bugs, like Starship Troopers, or Terminators, which are terrifying. So
Right.
you get the best of both worlds. So
I have not played, but I've heard you play.
Yeah,
which is just as good.
it's just as good. There's probably some coarse language here and there.
Yes.
It doesn't sound quite as cozy.
No,
No.
it is definitely not a cozy
fun.
game. My ship, though, is very cozy. I have lots of screens and guns in it, but
Expect nothing less.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show, Nathan. We have enjoyed the conversation about Mythwind. If anything, it has got Angela and I like super interested in not only this game, but what games you have already in your studio and where you're going. So that has been very eye-opening and fun to hear about.
Yes.
So, and then we'll just plug the Kickstarter one last time. You said March 26th.
That's
check
correct.
it out, Mythwind, the reprint. And I'll just ask again, anything else you want to say?
No, I think we've covered everything, but thank you for having me. It's been great fun.
Yeah, of course.
Awesome. Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Married and Bored podcast. And guess what? We have a website where you can listen to podcast episodes and so much more. Find us at marriedandbored.com, or you can email us at hello@marriedandbored.com, or follow us on Instagram at marriedandbored. Music in this episode is by Joseph McDade. See you next time.